use in order to come across a more comprehensive understanding of research findings. Okay, I have this quote from Aristotle that we are what we repeatedly do, and for those who are interested or they have worked with regard to construct, this is also a definition for construct. A construct is something that is repeated and therefore can be conceived as a concept and used as a concept. So Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do, and excellence then is not an act. So similar to construct, something that happens only once cannot be considered as a construct. Excellence is not an act. So if we as researchers actually do one good piece of research, that's not excellent research. When we do it as a habit, then becomes excellent. And therefore, the implication of this Aristotle's expression saying for us as researchers is that we are known by our research. And if we do it repeatedly, then let's do it with good practice or best practice. And best practice means truthfulness and trustworthiness and validity. So since we are involved in research and we do research, as one of our, activities, therefore we need to do it as trustworthy as possible. So since we talked about trustworthiness of research, then let's break it down to some down-to-earth, questions and understanding so that we can make sense of it. When we talk about validity or trustworthiness, some people think that it's something that happens afterwards, post hoc, after the research has been carried out, and therefore we need to provide some evidence for that. No, I would say that validity and truthfulness and trustworthiness, it starts from the very beginning of research. And so when we are at the stage of choosing a research problem and formulating some research questions, we need to think and ask ourselves, why this particular research problem? What is significant about it? And interestingly enough, as some participants might be master's or PhD students, you will be required when you put in a proposal for your thesis that you need to state the problem. Usually it is said that the proposal starts with the statement of the problem. So you need to articulate, you need to explain what the problem is. Why is it important? Why is it significant? And when it comes to research questions, again, similar thing, that we usually try to contextualize them by previous research. And again, this is why we carry out a literature review in order to be in a position that we can justify the choice of the problem and the formulation of the research questions. So as you can see, it starts from the very beginning of research, and then once we have justified our research problem and research questions, then we need to justify why certain data sources. So the appropriateness and the soundness of the data sources is another important thing in the truthfulness and trustworthiness of the research. And then why particular analysis? Because there could be different types of analysis. Why should we use this particular, and this needs explanation. And finally, what legitimates the produced knowledge? Since every knowledge as a product of research is considered as a propositional knowledge, therefore, we need to, provide evidence for why should people actually believe it? Why should people, accept it? And this is where we try to change information into knowledge, and by interpreting the data and analysis, as well as discussing it in relation to other studies. So in a sense, I would say authenticity. So I can tell you that the more authentic you are, or we are, in our research, the more truthful and the more trustworthy our research would be. So these are related to each other, and they are not mutually exclusive. So in order to have trustworthy research, we need to be authentic. Before anyone gets back to us in the position of supervisor or journal reviewers or any other reviewer of our proposals or our papers, we do need to interrogate ourselves and ask ourselves these questions. And if we are able to provide answer to these questions, then we are in a good position. And therefore, what we write actually would be authentic and would be understandable to other people who would be reading our research report. Okay, so this is because, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that we are ultimately going to change our understanding of the defined problems that might relate to ourselves, to our society, to our context, to our world, in a sense, based on the data and analysis and the knowledge outcomes that come from that analysis. And as we noticed, this needs to be used in our lives, and therefore make changes in our practices to the benefit of the society at large. And therefore, this is why that every aspect of this research needs to be truthful and valid and trustworthy. Okay, the next question is, what criteria can we use for trustworthiness in or validity in different research paradigms? As I'm sure most of you know, especially my colleagues who have kindly attended this session, in quantitative research, two key concepts are reliability and validity. And through reliability, we try to provide evidence that our research is consistent, is reliable, and through validity, we try to provide evidence that what we are narrating as knowledge is meaningful. There are two aspects of reliability in quantitative research. One is in instruments consistency in collecting data, because if an instrument is not reliable, then its outcome is not reliable either. The best example is that if I'm using a blood pressure instrument, and if this instrument is not working well, so I'm not able to rely on the outcome, on the readings of the blood pressure. And you can extend this to any other type of instrument. When it comes to education, for example, in education we are mostly dealing with educational assessment. So if our assessments are not reliable, then the outcome of those assessment procedures and the decisions even that we make on them are not reliable. So one of the important things in quantitative research is to show that our instruments of data collection are reliable. And usually we do through different methods that we are familiar with, and I'm not going to go through them, but ultimately it's usually providing an index. And this index, as you know, is between 0 and 1. The higher the index, the more reliable the instrument is. But the other aspect of reliability is to provide enough information and details of the processes that we have gone through. And this alludes to the replicability of the study. So if by reading a research report, we are able to replicate it, then we can say that that a study and report actually is reliable. For validity in quantitative research, especially if it applies to experimental design, there are two types of validity, again, as you're familiar with. One is internal validity. In that, we would like to say that what we have come across as findings are the result of the manipulation of variables and in the research, and not any other variable outside the study. And so one mechanism for ensuring internal validity in experimental designs is to ensure that any extraneous variables are controlled, and therefore what we get as the effect of independent variable on the dependent variable is exactly due to that relationship, a cause and effect relationship. The other aspect of validity in quantitative research is external validity that we usually ensure by using a statistical test of significance, because we are usually working with a small sample from a population. Therefore, when we want to say that our study has external validity or generalizability, in the sense that our findings can be generalized to the target population, then usually we use the outcomes of the statistical test of significance and argue and make the point that based on this result, our findings are generalizable to the target population. When it comes to qualitative research, actually, it's a matter of trustworthiness. Although some qualitative researchers use the word validity still, and it's very common practice. We have conducted a research with Dr. Kambar and another colleague, Dr. Rizwani, on, for example, Journal of Second Language Writing, and we have come across one of the findings actually is that still most of L2 writing researchers use validity, prefer validity over trustworthiness. It would be interesting actually to interview them and see what's the reason, which we don't know. But the exact word in qualitative research is trustworthiness. In other words, validity is more quantitatively based. It's a term and terminology and concept in quantitative research, whereas in qualitative research, basically, it is trustworthiness. And in mixed methods, it's a mixture of both criteria. Today, we are going to focus on trustworthiness in qualitative research and how we can ensure that when we conduct, qualitative research, then we would be able to show that the outcome of our research is valid, meaningful, and trustworthy. The questions to address regarding trustworthiness is, what is trustworthiness and what does it comprise? So, meaning-wise, as I have repeated it from the beginning of my presentation, it's similar to validity. And validity basically means truthfulness and meaningfulness, whether an outcome that we get from our research is meaningful and truthful or not. And the next question is, how is trustworthiness compared to quality and rigor criteria in quantitative research? And what is expected from qualitative researchers to ensure that trustworthiness of their research? In other words, I assume that at least some of our audience today are qualitative researchers, and therefore they are concerned about how to ensure that when they report a qualitative study, they can convey trustworthiness with their readers. In the first instance, with the reviewers and other people, and in the second instance with the general readership. So I have two quotes here. One is from Pilot and Beck regarding trustworthiness or rigor. Again, because rigor, validity, trustworthiness are used interchangeably and synonymously. So trustworthiness or rigor of a study refers to the degree of confidence in data. So remember, I said that once we have identified our research problem and formulated our research question, the next step would be to collect relevant, appropriate data. And we need to ensure that our data is relevant and appropriate for the type of questions that we are addressing. And therefore, one aspect of trustworthiness is confidence in data. We are able to explain why we have collected and relied on these data sources, and therefore have confidence in that. The other aspect of trustworthiness is interpretation. Again, as you remember, I mentioned that once we change and process data into information, we need to interpret that, and therefore confidence in interpretation. And the methods used to ensure the quality of a study. So as you can see, Pilot and Beck actually try to convey the message and the idea that trustworthiness applies to different stages of research, from data collection, data analysis, interpretation, and the methods that we have used in order to collect and analyze the data. So up to this point, if we want to to put in a nutshell what trustworthiness is, based on what we have discussed, is trustworthiness relates to different steps and stages in the process of qualitative research and making sure that they are authentic, that we have justification for what we have done. And later on, we will see that one strategy actually is reflexivity and journal logs. So as qualitative researchers, we need to be reflexive of what we have done, our own roles, as well as taking notes of different decisions that we make at different stages in the process of research. And these notes and journal logs could be used in order to explain and justify and provide evidence of confidence for the data, for the interpretation, and for the methods that we have used. In their seminal book and work, Lincoln and Guba in 1985 tried to break down trustworthiness into 4 components or 4 quality criteria. In other words, they argued for qualitative researchers in order to claim for trustworthiness or validity of their research, they need to show that their research is credible. They need to show that the findings and the outcomes of their research is transferable to other contexts. They need to show that they are dependable and also confirmable. And we will see that actually these 4 concepts or quality criteria are synonymous to quantitative concepts that we are more familiar with. In this table, as you can see on the left, it might be on your right, I have provided quality and rigor criteria in quantitative research. And in front of it, I have provided equivalent criteria in qualitative research. So as I discussed it before, so for the case of internal validity, we have credibility in qualitative research, as similar to what we did in quantitative research in order to show that what we are reporting is the outcome of the effect of variables on each other. In qualitative research, we need to provide some evidence that what we are reporting is the outcome of the data and analysis. External validity, on the other hand, relates to transferability. Since we said that in quantitative research, researchers try to show that their findings are generalizable to the target population. There is no such sense in qualitative research, but it is recommended that we provide some evidence that the findings of our research are transferable to similar contexts. So if you have carried out, for example, a qualitative research on immigrants in one context, and if another person is reading the outcomes of your research in another context, they would be interested to find out to what extent your findings are transferable to their context, and therefore use the outcomes of your research. And as you can see, reliability or consistency in research relates to dependability, to what extent our procedures in qualitative research are dependable. And finally, objectivity in quantitative research, which is very much emphasized. And as we know, the role of researcher in quantitative research is an outsider, is an external role. And it is claimed that in quantitative research, researchers actually do not involve themselves, nor their ideas, their beliefs, their opinions, values. This is why it is said that quantitative research is value-free. And therefore, through these mechanisms, they try to show that their findings and reports are objective. We don't have a similar stance in qualitative research, especially because, as we understand it, qualitative research is subjective, and therefore the researcher is highly involved in all the steps and procedures of the qualitative research. However, it is recommended that we show that our interpretations are confirmable. And through one way or another, through one technique or another technique, one method or another method, we show that what we are reporting as results are confirmable. And we do not have bias. In other words, our findings and results are not biased, or are not, the researchers, production. They are coming from, data. Okay, so what are the strategies to ensure that trustworthiness for qualitative research actually is trustworthiness through these mechanisms that I mentioned, and we can find out how we can ensure that we can do these things. So let's have a look at some of the strategies that we can use, and I think these are the important, because finally we need some take-home messages, as okay, after this seminar and presentation, if I'm going to design and implement a qualitative research, what should I do in order to claim that my research has credibility, and especially when it comes to reporting the qualitative research. Okay, so the first quality criteria for trustworthiness is credibility, which equals to internal validity, but it's not exactly the same. And it could be done through triangulation. So the strategy that qualitative researchers can use in order to show that their outcomes, their research outcomes, the knowledge that they have produced is credible, is through triangulation. And as you know, triangulation was popularized by Denzin through several, through several outputs, including journal articles, book chapters, books, encyclopedia entries as well as handbooks. So Tenzin is the key figure in triangulation. If you are interested to read more about triangulation, then Tenzin is a must read figure in qualitative research. Triangulation itself has different forms. One is data triangulation. So if I'm going to do qualitative research and I want to make my research credible, then I need to collect data from different sources using different methods of data collection. So as you can see, the number one and number two can overlap with each other. For example, if I'm going to explore teaching in a particular context, then I need to collect my data through different methods and data sources. I can observe the class, number one. I can use the handouts distributed to the students, number two, for example. I can interview the teacher, number three, for example. I can interview the students. So as you can see, of course, I'm not saying that all of the four are required and necessary, but what I'm saying is that we can think about different methods of data collection because as we later on see, if the outcome of different data sources converge with each other, then that's a sign of credibility. This means that what we are reporting as the outcome of our research. So, for example, I might say that this particular teachers in this particular context have more a student-centered approach. Then I need to support this knowledge claim through interview with the teacher, students, the class observations, as well as the type of tasks and classroom activities that have been carried out and I have collected and analyzed. So two methods of triangulation are data triangulation and method triangulation. The third one is investigator triangulation. So if I am observing one classroom, I might ask a friend of mine, another researcher, to observe the class as well. And if both of us come across, the same results, again, this is another index for credibility of our, findings. And this is called investigator, triangulation. And the fourth one is prolonged engagement, which is mostly used in ethnographic study. So if we are planning at an ethnography, one requirement is that we be in the site of research for a long time. So it's not possible to collect, for example, data for 1 week and then talk about, the beliefs, the customs, the everyday activity of a particular group of language learners, for example. So we need to have prolonged engagement in order to develop an insider view. And therefore, one of the aspects of credibility in ethnographic study is how long the researcher have been involved in the research site. And this is why that is considered as one of one piece of evidence. And the other one is member check. In qualitative research, especially in our discipline, applied linguistics, and all the sub areas, we usually interview people, and interviewing now is a very common practice for collecting qualitative data. We transcribe the interviews and then we analyze them and then we come across some outcomes and findings. So one strategy recommended is member check. After we interview people and we transcribe them, it would be a good idea to submit a copy to those people who have been interviewed to check and see whether what we have transcribed is accurate or not. And if they approve, that's another sign of credibility. More importantly, however, is when we do analysis and interpret the qualitative data, mostly the interviews, again, it is recommended that we submit a copy of our interpretation of the qualitative data to the participants so that they can reflect on that, and if there are any misunderstandings, they can correct it. So all of these strategies, 4 strategies, data triangulation, method triangulation, is investigator triangulation, and prolonged engagement and member check, are strategies that qualitative researchers can use in order to provide evidence for the credibility of the final results that they come across. As I mentioned, depending on the scope of the research project, all of these 4 might be used. 2 of them might be used, or at least 1 might be used. So the expectation is that at least we have different data sources so that when we make a point, it could be supported by evidence from different sources. So that's about credibility and how we might go about and ensure that we provide evidence for the